In 1828, Charleston was built on fear. Black men had no rights, no voice, no escape. But one enslaved black man decided he would no longer suffer in silence. His name was Solomon. They beat him, they took his family, they treated him like nothing. So he did something no one believed a slave could do. One by one, his cruel masters began to disappear. No weapons, no witnesses, only the ground that swallowed the truth. This is the true story of a man who turned fear against the powerful. If this story shocked you, don't forget to subscribe for more real, untold history, and tell me in the comments, which state are you watching this video from? In 1828, Charleston, South Carolina, life moved to the sound of chains, river water, and order shouted by white men who believed they owned everything, including other human beings. Charleston was rich and busy. Ships came and went. Cotton, rice, and sugar made powerful men richer every year. But behind this wealth was pain. Thousands of black people lived as slaves, watched day and night, beaten for small mistakes, and sold like objects without warning. Solomon was one of them. He was a black man in his early 30s, tall but slightly bent from years of hard labor. His skin was marked with old scars, some from whips, some from heavy work, some from punishment that had no reason at all. To the masters, Solomon looked harmless. He spoke softly. He followed orders fast. He kept his eyes low and his mouth shut. Many believed he was weak, but Solomon was not weak. He worked near the Charleston river docks and moved between plantations. This made him valuable. Masters trusted him to carry goods, messages, and tools. They believed trust was control. What they didn't understand was that Solomon saw everything. He noticed which masters drank too much, which ones walked alone at night, which paths were quiet, which lands flooded after rain. He listened while pretending not to hear. Solomon had not always been this silent. Years earlier, he had a wife. Her name was Ruth. She laughed softly and sang while working. She made Solomon feel human in a world designed to crush him. They had a son together. The boy was small but fast, always curious, always hungry. Hunger was common among slaves. Food was controlled like punishment. One night, the boy was caught stealing corn. He was beaten badly in front of others. The punishment did not stop. The master wanted an example. The child did not survive the night. Solomon was forced to watch. A few months later, Ruth was sold to another plantation. Solomon never saw her again. There was no goodbye, no explanation, just empty space where his family once stood. Something inside Solomon died in 1828, but something else was born. After that year, he stopped reacting. When whipped, he did not cry. When insulted, he did not speak back. Masters saw this as obedience. They praised him. They trusted him more. They thought his spirit was broken. But Solomon was changing in silence. Every night he remembered faces, names, voices. He remembered the screams of men buried in shallow graves after punishment went too far. He remembered bodies thrown into rivers as if they were nothing. He learned that the land already hid many secrets. Charleston itself felt uneasy at night. Fog rolled in from the water. Marshlands swallowed sound. Footsteps disappeared in mud. Solomon learned how quiet the world could become after dark. He noticed something else, too. Masters felt safe, too safe. They walked without fear. They punished without concern. They believed no one would ever fight back. Solomon did not hate all white men, but he hated cruelty. He hated power without limits. He hated the way masters slept peacefully while slaves cried quietly into dirt floors.
In 1828, Solomon began to understand the world differently. He saw that laws protected only one side. Courts were useless. Words meant nothing. Pain was the only language Charleston truly understood. He did not plan revenge that year, not yet, but he started preparing. He memorized land paths. He learned how storms changed the earth. He watched how quickly the ground swallowed things after heavy rain. He noticed how few questions were asked when a cruel man disappeared. Masters assumed slaves ran away or accidents happened. They never imagined fear could climb upward. Solomon became invisible by choice. He smiled when ordered. He bowed his head. He moved quietly like a shadow that belonged everywhere and nowhere. Inside him, anger stayed cold, controlled, waiting. In 1828, Charleston saw Solomon as nothing more than a useful slave, a body to work, a tool to move goods. But the city did not know this simple truth. The ground beneath Charleston was already listening.
By late 1829, Solomon was no longer the same man he had been a year earlier. On the outside, nothing had changed. He still worked hard, he still followed orders, he still lowered his eyes when spoken to. But inside, his thoughts were always moving. He was watching people more carefully now, especially his master. This master was known for his bad temper. He drank almost every night. When he drank, he became crueler than usual. He enjoyed punishing slaves late at night when no one could see clearly and screams could disappear into the dark air. Other masters avoided him, but they also feared him because he was rich and violent. Solomon knew his habits well. He knew that after drinking, the master liked to walk near the marshland behind the plantation. The place was quiet, wet, and dangerous. The ground was soft, and fog often covered the area. No one went there unless ordered. It was the kind of place where mistakes could disappear. One night, Solomon was called outside after a long day of work. His body was already tired, his hands shaking from exhaustion. The master accused him of working too slowly. There was no proof, there was no reason, but reason was never needed. The master was drunk. He shouted, cursed, and pushed Solomon toward the marsh. The air was heavy. Insects buzzed. The smell of wet soil filled Solomon's nose. Other slaves stood far away, afraid to move, afraid to speak. The beating began. Solomon felt the pain, sharp and deep, but something strange happened. For the first time, fear did not control him. His heart did not race, his mind did not break. He stayed calm, almost empty. He thought of his son, he thought of his wife, he thought of the years of silence. The master stepped back, laughing, raising his arm again. Then it happened. The ground beneath the master's feet was wet and uneven. He slipped. His body fell hard. His head struck a stone hidden in the mud. The sound was dull, final, and wrong. Everything became quiet. The master did not move. Solomon stood frozen, staring at the body. He waited for shouting, for guards, for punishment, but nothing came. The fog thickened. The night swallowed the moment. Slowly, Solomon stepped closer. He listened for breathing. There was none. He touched the man's chest. Still nothing. The master was dead. Solomon's hands shook, not from fear, but from understanding. He knew what this meant. If the body was found, he would be blamed. Slaves were always blamed. There would be no questions, no trial, no mercy. Running would not save him. For a long moment, Solomon thought about screaming, about calling for help, about pretending nothing had happened. But another thought came,
calm and clear. No one cared when slaves died. Why would they care now? Solomon looked around. The marsh was empty. The fog hid everything. The earth was soft and dark, almost welcoming. He remembered all the shallow graves he had seen before. He remembered how quickly the ground could hide the truth. He made a choice. Using all his strength, Solomon dragged the body deeper into the marsh. The weight was heavy, but anger gave him power. His hands sank into mud, his feet slipped, but he kept moving. He found a place where the ground dipped naturally. Using his hands, he began to dig. The soil was wet and easy to move. The earth opened without resistance. As he worked, Solomon did not cry, he did not pray. He felt strangely calm. When the hole was deep enough, he pushed the body inside. The man who once shouted orders now lay silent, powerless. Solomon covered him with soil, packing it down carefully. The mud swallowed the shape. Within minutes, there was nothing to see. Just ground, just night. Solomon stood there, breathing hard. His clothes were dirty, his hands were shaking again, but now with something new. Not fear, not pain, control. He cleaned himself as best he could in the marsh water. He walked back slowly, carefully, as if nothing had happened. No one stopped him. No one asked questions. The next morning, the plantation was in confusion. The master was missing. People searched. Slaves were questioned harshly, but the marsh revealed nothing. The ground looked untouched. Some said the master had fallen into the river drunk. Others said he had run away. No one imagined the truth. Solomon listened quietly. That night, he could not sleep. He stared at the ceiling, replaying the moment again and again. He realized something terrifying and powerful. A master had died, and the world did not end. The plantation still stood. Orders were still given. Slaves still worked. Life continued. For the first time, Solomon understood how fragile power really was. That night changed him forever. What began as an accident became a lesson. The earth could hide crimes, silence could protect him, and fear could move in both directions. Solomon did not feel proud. He did not feel guilty. He felt awake. And deep inside, a dangerous thought took root. If one cruel master could disappear, others could do too.
Between 1830 and 1832, Charleston slowly changed, though most people did not understand why. Life looked the same on the surface. Ships still arrived, cotton and rice still filled warehouses, masters still gave orders, slaves still worked from sunrise to night. But beneath this normal life, something dark was moving quietly. It started with whispers. One cruel master failed to return home after a late-night walk. At first, no one worried. Masters often drank, traveled, or stayed with friends. But days passed, then weeks. His body was never found. People assumed the river had taken him. Then another master disappeared. This one was known for chaining slaves outside as punishment. He vanished after a stormy night. His horse was found, his coat was found, but he was gone. Fear began to spread, slowly and silently. Solomon watched all of this from the shadows. After the first burial, Solomon did not rush. He did not act wild or careless. He understood something important now. Patience was power. He continued working like nothing had changed. He kept his head down. He spoke only when spoken to. Masters trusted him even more because he looked harmless. That trust became his greatest weapon. Solomon began to notice patterns. The cruelest masters followed routines. They punished slaves at night. They walked alone. They drank too much. They believed no one would ever touch them.
Solomon did not choose men randomly. He chose those whose cruelty had destroyed lives. He also chose places carefully. Charleston had many quiet lands, marshes, riverbanks, low fields where floods erased footprints. Solomon studied these areas while working. He learned how rain softened the soil. He learned how long it took for water to wash away signs. The land itself became his partner. The second disappearance was not an accident. That master had beaten an elderly slave to death weeks earlier. One night, Solomon followed him quietly. There were no screams, no fight that others could hear, just silence and the slow work of hands and rope. The earth did the rest. After that, Solomon understood something clearly. He was no longer reacting. He was choosing. Each time he waited, sometimes weeks, sometimes months. He did not feel rushed. He believed rushing led to mistakes. The city was already full of violence. One more disappearance blended into the noise. By the third and fourth masters, rumors turned into fear. Plantation owners spoke in low voices. Some stopped night punishments. Others carried weapons. But weapons were useless against silence. Slaves noticed the change too. They did not speak openly. Speaking was dangerous, but looks were exchanged. Quiet hope moved through the quarters. For the first time, masters looked over their shoulders. Solomon never told anyone what he was doing. He worked alone. He trusted no one. Trust was dangerous. By 1832, 6 masters had vanished. Authorities questioned slaves harshly. Beatings increased in some areas. But fear made masters careless. They assumed slaves would never fight back in this way. They searched for runaway slaves, not a hidden enemy. Solomon stayed close to danger without being seen. What made Solomon different was not strength, it was control. He did not hate wildly, he hated carefully. He did not act from anger alone, he acted from memory. Before each burial, he remembered faces. His son, his wife, the men and women who never lived long enough to tell their stories. He believed the earth should hold those who caused such pain. By the 7th disappearance, Charleston felt tense. Masters hired guards. Some sent families away. Others blamed rival whites or accidents. The truth felt too terrifying to accept. A black slave could not be responsible. That idea alone scared them more than death. Solomon knew the risk was growing. Each act made the ground hotter beneath his feet, but stopping felt impossible. Too much pain lived inside him now, and something else lived there too, a sense of purpose. When the 9th master disappeared, Solomon understood it was time to slow down. Too many questions were being asked. Too many eyes were open. The land could hide bodies, but patterns always rise. He waited again. He became invisible again. Charleston never found the graves. Floods erased the signs. Time erased the trails. But fear stayed. Between 1830 and 1832, power shifted without laws, without speeches, without guns. It shifted because one black man learned that even the strongest masters were helpless once the ground closed over them, and Charleston would never feel safe the same way again.
By 1833, Solomon's life had become a quiet balance between normal work and a hidden purpose. To the outside world, he was still the same man, silent, obedient, and unnoticed. But inside, his thoughts were heavy and clear. He had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. There was no turning back to who he once was. Solomon did not wake up each day thinking about killing. That was not how his mind worked. He thought about memory. He thought about fairness in a world that had none. He believed pain had been given freely for too long without consequence. Now, for the first time, there was a cost. He never celebrated what he had done. There was no joy in it. Every burial stayed with him.
Faces returned in dreams. Hands reached out from the dark earth. But when he woke, he reminded himself why he had done it. He reminded himself of his son's small body broken for stealing food. He reminded himself of Ruth being taken away without a word. He reminded himself of screams that no one answered. To Solomon, what he was doing was not murder. It was balance. Before each act, Solomon followed the same quiet ritual. He would wait until night when the world slowed down and sound traveled less. He would stand alone and whisper names, not the names of the masters, but the names of slaves who had died without justice, men who were whipped to death, women who disappeared, children who never grew old. He believed the earth listened. Solomon thought that if the ground could hold the bodies of the innocent, it could also hold the bodies of the guilty. To him, the soil was not hiding a crime, it was remembering. By this time, fear had fully entered Charleston's white society. Masters spoke differently now. Their voices were louder during the day, but softer at night. Some refused to walk alone. Others stopped drinking so heavily. Night punishments became rare. Whips stayed quiet after sunset. Solomon noticed these changes with calm attention. For years, slaves had lived in fear. Now, fear was moving upward. It was slow, but it was real, and that alone told Solomon he had changed something. Among the slaves, hope moved like a quiet wind. No one spoke openly, that would be dangerous, but eyes met differently now. There was less shame in them, less surrender. People walked a little straighter. Even silence felt different. Solomon never accepted praise because none was spoken aloud, but he felt the shift. He felt it when masters hesitated. He felt it when punishments ended early. He felt it when guards avoided certain lands. Still, the weight of what he was doing grew heavier. Solomon knew he could not continue forever. Every disappearance made the danger greater. He understood patterns, and he knew others would see them too. The earth could hide bodies, but it could not hide fear forever. Some nights Solomon asked himself if he had become the same as the men he buried. That question haunted him, but each time the answer returned slowly and firmly. Those men chose cruelty. He chose response. In 1833, Solomon also saw something new. Not all masters were the same. Some were cruel without thinking. Others followed the system quietly. Solomon did not touch those who showed restraint. He believed blindness and violence were different things. His choices were careful. This control was what kept him alive. Charleston's leaders began to worry, not just about death, but about reputation. The city was proud of its order and power. Disappearing masters threatened that image. They feared panic more than truth. They feared questions from outside more than justice. So they chose silence. There were no public announcements, no large investigations. Everything was done quietly. Slaves were questioned harshly, but no answers came. The idea that one enslaved man could cause such fear was too dangerous to accept. To Solomon, this silence felt like a shield, but it was also a warning. The city was closing its fist. At night, Solomon sometimes walked near the marshes and riverbanks, listening to the wind move through tall grass. He felt tired now, not in his body, but in his spirit. Revenge did not heal him. It only reminded him of how broken the world was. Yet when he thought about stopping, another image returned. The image of a master laughing during punishment. The image of power without mercy. And so Solomon continued, slowly, carefully, knowing every step mattered. By the end of 1833, Charleston was a city holding its breath. Masters feared the dark. Slaves felt something close to dignity for the first time in their lives. And the land, silent and deep, held secrets no one dared to dig up. Solomon understood one final truth during this time. Fear could not free him, but it could make the powerful feel human.
By 1834, Charleston no longer felt like the same city. The streets looked busy during the day, but something heavy sat in the air. People spoke faster, looked around more, and trusted less. The disappearances of powerful masters could no longer be ignored. Fear had spread too far, and now it had a name, even if no one said it out loud. Masters were scared. For years, fear had only moved in one direction. Slaves feared punishment. Slaves feared hunger. Slaves feared being sold away from their families. Masters believed fear belonged below them. But now that belief was cracking. Plantation owners began to change their behavior. Night punishments became rare. Men who once walked proudly through dark fields now asked others to walk with them. Some masters started sleeping with weapons near their beds. Others drank less, afraid of losing control. Solomon watched all of this quietly. He did not smile. He did not feel proud, but he understood something important. Fear was finally touching the right people. Charleston's leaders met in private. They spoke behind closed doors, away from slaves and workers. They feared that if the truth spread, everything would collapse. They worried that slaves might realize how fragile their masters truly were. That idea terrified them more than death itself. So they acted carefully. Patrols were increased at night. Guards were placed near plantations and river paths. Rewards were quietly offered for information, but nothing was announced publicly. The city wanted control, not panic. Slaves felt the pressure immediately. Questioning became harsher. Innocent men were beaten for answers they did not have. Some were jailed without reason. Masters were angry because fear had wounded their pride. They needed someone to punish. Solomon knew this phase was dangerous. He became quieter than ever. He avoided attention. He worked harder. He followed every order perfectly. He never stayed in one place too long. To survive, he became invisible again. Among the slaves, something unusual was happening. Hope was growing, but it was cautious. People whispered Solomon's name only when they were sure no one was listening. Some believed he was a spirit. Others believed he was many men, not one. A few believed he was sent by God, but no one tried to find him. No one wanted to know the truth. Knowing could mean death. To them, Solomon was not a murderer. He was a warning. Solomon felt the weight of this change deeply. He had never wanted to become a symbol. He only wanted balance. But now his actions were larger than him. They were changing behavior. They were shaping fear. At night, Solomon often struggled to sleep. His mind replayed every step, every sound, every risk. He knew the city was tightening around him like a trap. The more masters feared, the more dangerous his position became. Still, he could not ignore what he saw. Some masters began treating slaves slightly better, not out of kindness, but fear. Food portions improved on certain plantations. Punishments became less public. A few masters even freed slaves quietly, hoping to protect themselves. These changes were small, but they mattered. Solomon understood something painful then. Kindness born from fear was still not justice, but it was better than cruelty without limits. Charleston had become a city watching itself. Every stranger felt suspicious. Every shadow felt dangerous. Masters no longer believed the land belonged fully to them. The night no longer obeyed. Solomon began to pull back. He knew continuing at the same pace would lead to capture. The city was alert now. Mistakes would be noticed. Patterns would be exposed. He chose patience again. That decision was not easy. Inside him, anger still burned, but now it was mixed with caution. Survival mattered. If he was caught, everything would end, not just for him, but for the quiet fear he had planted. The hardest part was watching injustice continue while staying still. He saw masters who deserved punishment walk freely. He heard screams at night that he could not answer. Every time he did nothing, it hurt. But Solomon had learned that timing was everything. By the end of 1834, Charleston was exhausted.
Fear had drained energy from power. Masters no longer felt untouchable. Slaves no longer felt completely powerless. The city stood in an uncomfortable truth. Something had changed, and it could not be undone. Solomon knew this moment would not last forever. Fear fades, power adapts. The system always tries to repair itself. But for now, the balance had shifted. And even though Solomon remained unseen, unheard, and unnamed, his presence lived in every locked door, every guarded path, and every master who refused to walk alone after dark. Charleston had learned a lesson it would never forget. Fear can travel upward.
By 1835, the silence that had protected Solomon for years began to crack. Fear had made Charleston alert, and alert cities start looking for someone to blame. The masters could not accept that their power had been shaken by chance or by the land itself. They needed a face. They needed a reason. And slowly, that need turned into danger. Solomon felt it before he saw it. The air around the plantations had changed. Guards asked more questions. Eyes followed him longer than before. Small mistakes were noticed. Simple movements were remembered. Fear had sharpened attention, and attention was the enemy of secrecy. Solomon knew this time would come. He moved even more carefully now. He avoided marshes unless work demanded it. He spoke less than ever. He never stayed out late without reason. He kept his body tired and his face empty. But no matter how careful a man is, secrets grow heavy when too many people are afraid. The betrayal did not come from a master. It came from another enslaved man. This man was younger than Solomon. He had been beaten many times and had nothing left to lose. One night, he was taken by patrol guards and promised something powerful: freedom. Not later, not maybe, soon. All he had to do was talk. The man did not know everything. He did not know names or numbers, but he knew patterns. He knew who walked freely. He knew who moved between plantations. He knew who understood the land too well. He spoke Solomon's name. That was enough. Not long after, a violent storm hit Charleston. Rain fell for hours. The rivers rose. Marshland flooded and then slowly pulled back. When the water lowered, it revealed something it had hidden for years: bones. They were found near the riverbank, half buried, exposed by the storm. Workers stopped. Guards were called. Masters came quietly, fear thick in their faces. They knew what this meant. The city could no longer pretend. Authorities did not announce the discovery. There were no public notices, no rewards posted. Everything was done in silence. Charleston's leaders feared chaos. They feared rebellion. They feared the truth more than the deaths. An investigation began quietly. Slaves were questioned again. Harder this time. Beatings returned. Threats were made. But now the questions were focused. The net was tightening. Solomon felt it closing. One night, guards came for him. There was no shouting, no public scene. He was taken quietly from his sleeping place while others pretended not to see. No chains were needed. Solomon did not resist. He already understood. As they walked him through the dark streets, Solomon looked at Charleston one last time. The buildings stood tall. The roads were still. Nothing looked different, but everything was. He felt no panic, no anger, only a deep tiredness. Solomon was placed in a small cell, hidden away from the public. No records were made openly. No official charges were announced. Charleston did not want a story. It wanted an ending. During questioning, he was beaten, threatened, and starved. They wanted names. They wanted help. They wanted to know if others were involved. Solomon said nothing. Some say he never spoke a word. Others say he spoke calmly, without emotion. No one knows for sure. There are no records. That silence was intentional. Charleston's leaders understood something dangerous. If the truth spread, that one black man had caused such fear, everything could break. So they erased him. There was no public trial, no witnesses called openly, no papers signed for history. He was removed from the world at the same way his victims had been, quietly. Slaves whispered about his arrest. Masters avoided speaking his name. The city pretended nothing had happened. But fear did not disappear. Even after Solomon was gone, masters still avoided the marshes. Night punishments did not fully return. Guards stayed alert. The land itself felt dangerous. Solomon's final fate was never recorded. Some believed he was executed in secret. Others believed he was sent away, sold far from Charleston, erased into another life of chains. A few believed he escaped during transport. The truth was buried deeper than any grave. What mattered was this: even captured, Solomon had changed Charleston forever. The masters had learned something they could never forget. Power could be touched. Fear could rise. Silence could kill. And among the slaves, Solomon's story did not die with him. It lived quietly, passed in whispers, carried in looks, remembered in the dark. He had been betrayed. He had been erased, but he had not been defeated. Because long after Solomon disappeared, Charleston still feared the ground beneath its feet.
After Solomon was taken away in early 1836, Charleston entered a strange and uncomfortable silence. The city did not celebrate. There were no announcements, no public relief, no statements saying the danger was over. Instead, everything was pushed into the shadows, as if speaking about it might bring the fear back. There was supposed to be a trial. In a normal case, a white man accused of murder would stand before a court. Papers would be written, witnesses would speak, records would be saved. But Solomon was not a white man. He was an enslaved black man, and what he had done, if proven publicly, would shake the very foundation of Charleston's power. So the trial happened quietly, or perhaps it never truly happened at all. Some said Solomon was questioned by a small group of officials behind closed doors. No jury, no public room, no crowd. Just powerful men asking questions they were afraid to hear answers to. They wanted certainty, but they did not want truth. Rumors spread among slaves and workers. Some said Solomon confessed calmly. They said he did not beg, he did not cry. He simply admitted that the earth had taken what it was given. Others said he refused to speak at all, staring at the wall as if Charleston no longer existed to him. No one knows which story is true. What is known is this: there are no official records, no court documents, no written confession, no execution notice. It was as if Solomon never existed. Charleston's leaders understood the danger of memory. If Solomon's story was written down, it could be found later. It could be read. It could inspire others. A written truth can travel far and live long. So they chose erasure. Slaves noticed this immediately. They heard guards speaking in half sentences. They saw officials burning papers late at night. They felt the tension whenever Solomon's name was almost spoken, then swallowed. The city wanted to forget him, but forgetting is not the same as healing. Even without records, fear remained. Masters did not suddenly return to their old confidence. They did not laugh as loudly. They did not punish as freely at night. The memory of disappearing men was stronger than any quiet trial. Solomon had become something dangerous, not a man, a legend. Among the slaves, his story grew in whispers. Children were told to remember him without saying his name. Older men spoke of him only when alone. Women prayed quietly, believing he had been sent as a warning. Some said Solomon smiled during questioning. Some said he looked tired but peaceful. Some said he spoke only one sentence, that the ground remembers everything. No one could prove anything, and that uncertainty frightened the masters even more. Charleston tried to move on. Ships continued to arrive. Business continued. New masters took the place of old ones, but the feeling of safety never fully returned. Certain lands were avoided. Certain paths were left unused. The marshes became places no one wanted to claim. The earth had become suspicious. Officials made sure Solomon disappeared completely. His name was removed from work records. His living space was reassigned. New slaves were brought in who had never heard of him. Charleston tried to seal the wound by pretending it had never existed. But wounds do not close when they are ignored. Slaves understood this truth well. They knew Solomon's ending had been taken from him the same way his life had been taken, without choice. But they also knew something else. He had done what no one believed was possible. He had made the powerful afraid, without weapons, without armies, without speeches. Just silence, just patience, just the earth. Whether Solomon was executed, sold away, or locked forever in a hidden place did not matter as much as what he left behind. His absence spoke loudly. Masters knew they had survived, but they also knew survival was not victory. The system had been touched. That knowledge stayed. Years later, when new punishments were planned, someone always hesitated. When night walks were considered, someone always suggested waiting until morning. When cruelty grew too loud, someone remembered what happened last time fear was ignored. They never said Solomon's name. They didn't have to. By trying to erase him, Charleston made him permanent. A story without records lives longer than one written on paper. It changes shape. It moves quietly. It hides where power cannot reach. Solomon had been captured. He had been silenced. He had been removed from history books. But in early 1836, Charleston learned something it could never undo. Even when a man is erased, the fear he creates can remain, and the ground, patient and silent, keeps its own record.
After 1836, life in Charleston slowly returned to its routine on the surface. But deep underneath, something had changed forever. People worked, ships arrived, money moved, and new masters took the place of the old ones. From a distance, the city looked the same, but the feeling was not the same. The memory of Solomon lived quietly, like a shadow that never fully disappeared. No one ever spoke publicly about what had happened. There were no books, no official stories, no lessons taught to children in schools. Solomon's name did not exist in records, but absence itself became proof. When something is erased so completely, it leaves behind questions that never stop asking themselves. Among the slaves, Solomon became more than a man. He became a warning. He became hope. He became proof. Older slaves whispered his story to the young, always carefully, always quietly. They did not speak of numbers or details. They spoke of courage. They spoke of patience. They spoke of how fear once moved in the opposite direction. Some said Solomon was executed in secret, buried in an unmarked grave far from the city. Others believed he was sold to another state, forced to live again as a slave under a new name. A few believed something different, that he escaped during transport and vanished into the north, carrying his silence with him. No one knew the truth, and that uncertainty gave the story power. Masters hated that uncertainty. They wanted clean endings. They wanted control. But Solomon's ending refused to settle. It stayed open, like a wound that never closed. Years passed. New generations of masters grew up hearing half-stories. They were told to avoid certain lands. They were told not to walk alone at night. They were told to be careful near the marshes after rain. No one explained why. Fear was inherited without explanation. Some lands around Charleston were never fully trusted again. Marshes where the ground had once shifted were left untouched. Paths where masters disappeared were avoided. Workers claimed the land felt heavy there, as if it remembered footsteps that never returned. Even nature seemed to protect the secret. Storms came and went. Floods washed away evidence. The earth kept what it had been given. No one ever found all 9 graves. No one ever dared to dig too deeply. The ground had earned respect. Among the slaves, Solomon's story became something private and secret. It was not told loudly. It was not celebrated openly. It was remembered quietly, like a prayer. In a world where slaves were taught they were powerless, Solomon's existence alone was dangerous. He proved something the system could not accept, that power was not only held by those with whips and laws, that silence could be stronger than shouting, that patience could defeat cruelty. Solomon had not freed the slaves. He had not destroyed slavery. He knew one man could not do that, but he had done something just as important. He had broken the illusion of safety. Masters could no longer pretend they were untouchable. They could no longer believe fear belonged only to others. Once fear travels upward, it never fully goes back down. Charleston carried that lesson quietly into the future. Even decades later, when slavery itself began to weaken, old men remembered stories they could not fully explain. They remembered nights when powerful men vanished. They remembered how the city held its breath. They remembered how the ground seemed alive. Solomon was never honored. No grave marked his life. No stone carried his name. But memory does not need stone. It lives in behavior. It lives in hesitation. It lives in fear. If Solomon was executed, then he died knowing he had changed something. If he was sold away, then he carried his secret into another land. If he escaped, then he walked free with the earth's silence behind him. Whatever his fate, one truth remained. Charleston never truly buried Solomon. It buried the truth instead. And the truth has a way of surviving underground, waiting, patient, just like the man who taught the city to fear the ground beneath its feet.